Module C, Into the World, an introduction. So this is the final module that we'll be studying in HEC English. So obviously this is the third one out of A Beautiful Mind and Distinctly Visual. So module C is Into the World, and we're looking at how texts show us different ideas in terms of an individual or character's transition into the world. This is a very interesting unit and probably one of the easier ones out of the three, because I think it's the most relatable in terms of your own context and how you are able to put that in writing and reflect that in your discussion and exploration of the set texts. So quickly with the rubric, elective standard, Module C, Text of Society, Into the World. So I'll just read this. In this elective, students explore a variety of texts that deal with the aspects of growing up or transitioning to new phases of life and a broader world. People encounter different experiences and respond to them individually. These personal experiences may result in growth, change, or other consequences. Students respond to and compose a range of texts that illustrate different pathways into new experiences. They examine the features of texts that shape our knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs about individuals venturing into new experiences. Okay, so basically what this is telling us is that this whole unit, this whole module, is based on individuals seeking change or going through change. And because you guys are at a focal point or a very important point of your lives where you are going to go into the world per se, and you are going to be experiencing this change and transition, this unit is very good because it's the last unit, it's your last unit of English really, and it's basically setting you up to looking at your perspective at how you are going to go into the world. So that's very important, and so that's why there's that easy factor. Now, one of the things that the text and one of the things that this rubric says is that we are looking at how people respond to transition. So in that educating reader, which I'll get to later on in this presentation, we're looking at an individual who is changing from where she is and where she wants to be and her journey through that. And she meets characters on the way that support or challenge her in her transition. So we're looking at how text shape knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs. So in this story, she's going to university, so there's the knowledge factor. Her attitude changes towards life, and basically her beliefs are challenged throughout the play. So this unit is very much looking at that transition and change and journey in a sense. So the Board of Studies rubric states that we need to consider types of changes that allow us to move into the world. So that could be a physical change, it could be an emotional change, it could be psychological change, intellectual change. What are the types of changes that allow someone to move into the world? Now, into the world can be two things. It can be a physical thing, so me going out to a different job, or you guys finishing school, or literally walking out onto the road, or it can be an abstract thing. So maybe into the world in terms of someone's understanding of the world changing, or their ideology is being changed, or maybe their way of life or perspective on the world changing. So into the world is both an abstract idea and a literal idea. And so again, when we're going through this unit, we will look at those two different things and how are they explored in this text that we're looking at. So how different people respond to this transition in their own way. Sorry for the typo. So obviously, again, it's context, and I think we've all covered this in the different units that we've studied in English and probably other subjects. But context is all the different influences, all the different things that make up who we are. My context is an English teacher. I'm shaped by the way I was brought up, grew up in Liverpool. I am a West Tigers supporter because I live in the area. My context is all the different things that influence the way that I see the world. So therefore, if we have a different context, we respond differently to different opportunities, different circumstances, different things. And so we are looking at how different people respond to transition. So is my reaction to moving out into the world different from someone else's? Is it when I finished school, what did I look at when I finished? So maybe I saw it with, I took it with open arms. I was really excited. And maybe for someone else, it could have been a daunting and scary process. How do we respond to this transition? And obviously then the effects of this transition include growth, change, and other consequences. Now growth, we're always growing. So physically our body is growing, and hopefully mentally, where our mind is developing into something that will end up being mature. And so growth is very important. And when we look at the text educating reader, the character moves from someone who's very narrow-minded, and ironically moves into someone who is open-minded and back to narrow-minded, but there's some sort of growth. And then when she gets to the end stage of the play, she actually has a different perspective. And so we look at that growth. Change is the same thing. We look at physical changes of characters. We look at maybe their perspective or outlook onto the world. How does that change? And also we look at basically their relationships with other people and how they change. And as a consequence, those people as well. And finally, we look at other consequences. So that could be anything from plot development. It can be something how, so for example, in Educating Reader, there's certain characters that change, or certain characters that have their perspectives changed because of the change in the main character. We also see the change in people and the way they react to her, or maybe even change in her relationship with others as well. I think I just said the same thing 3 times, but I'm trying to make this presentation as long as I can. So exam requirements. So HSC exam requires you to prepare 800 to 1,000 word response. I like to tell my class, and I think the other teachers the same, we want to get you to write about 800 to 1,000 words in around 40 to 45 minutes, preferably 40 minutes. So that requires a lot of practice. And if you're not willing to practice, you're not going to get into that range in that bit of time in that exam, because remember, you're writing 3 800 to 1,000 word responses in 2 hours. So it's all about that practice, and I'm sure our other teachers have told you that. Prescribed text is Educating Reader. It's a play by Willie Russell. It's a great play. It's really easy to understand, and the ideas are great. So the play in itself, it's an easy read, but the concepts and ideas that are explored are pretty good. So in terms of the accessibility, very good to access, but it's also it's got that link between the abstract idea of into the world and obviously the physical transition. Related text, we are looking at, teachers will provide you with different related text, but again, this is your opportunity to find your own text that you think supports Educating Reader or supports the module. And obviously in your essay, that is 50% of your essay. So when you're writing an essay with a related text, it has to be even, because the first half is showing the marker, okay, you know the module, this is what you've done in class. The second half of the essay with your related text allows the marker to see that you understand the unit so much that you can choose and you can analyze your own text. And you've used the skills that you've developed with the original or prescribed text and use that for yourself. And that's really why it's 50-50 when in terms of how much time do you spend on your prescribed text and how much time do you spend on your related text. Okay. So, into the world. All individuals face transition in their lives, and I think I didn't mention this at the beginning of the presentation. You should be taking notes. I like to talk a lot. There's some notes on the slides and you can write them down, but make sure you're taking notes as well. That's very important. So, all individuals face transition in their lives, and I covered this in the slides before. The way that our lives are structured, we start at 0 age and then we're born, and then we move all the way to 80, 90, 100, whatever, when you die. That is in itself a transition. We're moving from one point to another. So all of a sudden, we understand that as individuals, our life is one big transition. And then in between that big transition, we have these little ones. So we transition through school. So you got kindergarten to year 12. You transition through university, TAFE, or an apprenticeship. You're going through one point to another. It's always moving from A to B. And sometimes you can move from A to B back to A in terms of, feeling. So I would be nervous when I start school at kindergarten and then go to year 12 and I'm confident. However, when I start university, I'm nervous again, and at the end of university, I'm confident. So it's that transition is something that's both forwards and backwards in terms of someone's emotional response to something, but physically we're moving from one place to another. Our bodies move from one place to another. So we all face transition. It's very important that we understand that, so then when we're writing a text or when we're reading Educating Reader, we can see the transition between Rita, who is the main character, and obviously Frank as well. And we'll find out who Frank is. He's basically someone who is Rita's companion and follows her transition. So the second point, we progress or sometimes resist change due to certain instances and circumstances. And that's normal. Okay, so no one ever, responds well to everything. There's always those little hiccups or those moments in one's life that allows people to be shaky or allows them to resist some sort of change. Now that could be something from you're resisting the fact that Zayn left One Direction and you're really upset about that, or you're resisting the fact that the West Tigers are the best team to ever play the NRL. So it's all of those different things. There's a resistance to that sort of change. There's a resistance, for example, if you have a new English teacher. There's a resistance if you have a new science teacher. There's a resistance if you have new neighbors, because you as a person aren't ready to cope or ready to adapt to that change, and that's fine. That's normal. And so for some people, we resist that change, and we look at that in the play. We have a character, it's Rita's husband. He's resistant to change, and to an extent Rita and Frank until later on in the play. And then we look at people who progress, people who embrace the change, who want to change for the better, for themselves to enter into the world, for people who are able to accept that change and accept all the positives and even some of the negatives into their own persona and in their transition, and therefore they are able to assimilate into the world that they want to be in and be in control of their lives. And in the third point, it is in our nature as human beings to adapt to change and impacted by internal and external motivators. Now that's very important too, and that all comes back to context and that idea that as individuals we all adapt and we are all influenced by different things in our lives, and then as a result we react or change to different scenarios in different ways. And so internal and external motivators are basically another way to look at context. In Educating Reader, I'm just going to keep going back to the play, and when you read it you'll understand, but I think it's just easier, so then when you listen to this again you can see the links. Reader is someone who is internally motivated, intrinsically motivated, if you want a better word. She is someone who takes control of her life and she wants to change, and that motivation comes from her. She's the person who's in control. She's the one who wants to make the change. She is the individual who does not let anyone else affect her. So she's an internally motivated, intrinsically motivated individual. And then you have others who are external motivators, and that could be due to responsibility, that can be due to many of reasons, but something else happens outside of their own motivation and forces them to change. Now, some things could be, you want to impress somebody, so you change, or you need to get this job, so you need to, fully embody all the characteristics that are needed to take a job, or you see someone else who's changed, and you want to change because you've seen someone else and they've motivated you to change. So a lot of people have different elements of internal and external motivators, and that's what we look at. Now, it's also, as I said, it's in our human nature to adapt to change, because we are always constantly changing. If things didn't change, if things didn't develop, things would be boring. And so into the world, we're looking at those different ideas. Alright, so key ideas to explore in this module. So how can one's transition into the world change their perspective? So basically, again, it's all the idea that individuals always change, and there's that transition. How can one's transition into the world change your perspective? Obviously, if I've got this one viewpoint of the world and I have some sort of change, that viewpoint is going to change as well. So how can someone's journey or transition affect the way that we see the world, affect the way that, that I understand things? Does it affect the way that I react to things? Does it affect my context? Does it contribute to my context? Obviously, these questions, guys, maybe write these down. These are very important because these can be the start of essay questions or some sort of thesis when you're writing your essays later on in the unit. The second one, can the way we interact with others be indicative of our circumstances? Again, that's a contextual question. And how does that affect individuals around people? So, if I'm someone who is always under the pump, who's always, busy and scared, does that affect the way that I speak to someone? Of course it does. I'm not going to be fully engaged. I'm going to be, anxious and worried and, all over the place. So obviously that's going to affect the way that I interact with someone. If I'm someone who, is pretty much got a good life, I'm chilled, I have no worries, and obviously the way I interact with someone would be different, it'd be laid back. There might be no instance of stress and maybe no instance of companionship because I just don't care. So it just depends, and that question looks at it in terms of educating reader. Um, she has relationships with, I think, three other characters, and basically at each phase or transitory phase of that person, of reader, she acts differently, and we see that transition, and the way that she acts to somebody is indicative of the way that so the way that her circumstances have changed. The third one, what are some of the factors that cause people to change? Very easy. So basically, motivation, so internal and external motivation, they affect the way that we want to change. Circumstance is also very important, again, to that second question. So basically our status and all the things that influence us as individuals. What's another thing? Friends and family, they cause us. Society, all these different things that cause people to change. And as a result, there's a lot of stuff we can write about in our essays. And again, we'll look at that in educating reader. How does that affect us? So finally, the play educating reader. So I'll just give you a little bit of information, and then Miss or Sir, whoever's got you, she will give you the worksheets that are required to fill out for the rest of the lesson. So educating reader is a play. Now, that's very important. So as we looked at distinctly visual, we looked at a story, and then we looked at A Beautiful Mind, which is a film. To round it out, we're looking at a play. Now that means that we have to know, understand, and be able to explain the different types of techniques used specifically for this type of text. So we'll be looking at costuming, blocking, stage directions. And yes, we'll look at similes and metaphors and all those things, and obviously dramatic irony. But we are looking at how this text type is used by the composer. Just like we look at film techniques with A Beautiful Mind, we're looking at all the different types of play or theatre techniques that are used in educating reader, and that's very important to understand. We can't just use simile and metaphor if we are looking at a play. Yes, we can do that when we're looking at a short story, and yes, we can only talk about different camera angles of the film, but it's vital that we understand those different techniques for a play. It's written by Willie Russell. That's all you really need to know. He's a playwright. And so the third point looks at someone trying to navigate and enter a world that she doesn't have access to. Reader is someone who is basically from lower class England. Best way to think of the show Geordie Shore. She's one of those people, or she used to be. And now she wants to transition into the world of academia, the intellectual world. Those people who go to Oxford and Cambridge. And so she goes there through this university program, and she's trying to enter that world, and she gets resistance, and she has all these different challenges, but she ends up figuring it out. And then obviously we look at how a relationship with someone who is in that world, and how does that help, and how do they bounce off one another. And the main point, implications of change and the impact on a person's sense of their relationships with others. So we look at how, because of a change, how does she interact with different characters? How does that change her perspective? And how does that, as a young British woman, how does that affect her standing in society? And obviously, how does she find herself and understand herself? And that's basically the play. Obviously, a lot more different things, and we'll look at subjectivity, objectivity. We look at passion versus reason, and we will look at all of that throughout the play. But in terms of just for now, until obviously when I get back of my class and all the other classes with their teachers, then we'll look at that during the play. So thank you very much. Just a couple of reminders. Make sure you go and borrow the book. Obviously, if you've still got your texts from the previous units in Year 11, return them as quick as you can, because next lesson we will be starting to look at the play. Also, make sure you're practicing your other essays and your modules, especially your distinctly visual. You don't want to forget about that, especially since the half yearly was not too long ago. You want to type that out and try fixing that and practicing writing that. Creative writing is an issue. Make sure that everyone attempts to do that. Send them to your teachers. Make sure you are on top of it, especially as we lead up into, obviously, this final assessment task for this unit and the trials, which aren't too far away. So thank you very much for listening. Mrs. or Sir, whoever's there, is going to give you the worksheet. Complete that for the rest of the lesson. Any questions, you can ask me in the playground, or if you're in my class, you can ask me in class. Or again, you can talk to the teacher if they can help you who's there. All right, thank you very much. Have a lovely day.